So I'm at the ballet watching my daughter dance, and I get a message that there's been a bunch of stabbings again in the UK on a train. And Keir Starmer comes out and says some bullshit that I don't really care about. So at this point, it's just meh. Listen, you have to resign, Keir Starmer, and there needs to be a general election in the UK. You are not protecting the British people. This is disgraceful. This is twice in a week. Twice in a week. Resign. And get someone who's actually going to do something about this issue into the government. How many people have to die? How many innocent Britons have to die before you'll get your shit together? You disgust me.
So we got a pretty major international news story for you here today out of the UK, although I'm sure to most of our American audience, this is going to sound awfully familiar because as we talk about some of these issues, you realize they're not exclusive just to America. This is something gripping basically the entire West. And this comes after at least 11 people were hospitalized, 9 with critical life-threatening injuries, after a gang of 2 men ran around a train that was bound for London, right? Public transit essentially, and were indiscriminately trying to stab everybody on board. Yeah, sound familiar? And much like we've seen a million times, I think what you're witnessing right now is a pretty clear attempt by the British government to cover up what actually happened. They will not release the names of the suspects, even though they have those suspects in custody. They are, of course, claiming that this is not a terrorist attack, even though it pretty clearly seems to me like a terrorist attack, like about 10 people stabbed in a mass train attack, and you're saying it's not terrorism? What do you think it is then? 2 people were having a mental health episode, no motive whatsoever, right? Secondly, they're saying this story has nothing to do with immigration because the suspects in question here were born in the United Kingdom and they are citizens. To which I say, first of all, it is still a crime story, and those things go hand in hand when we talk about the failures of the British government to rein in any of the major problems that are gripping their society and the safety of their citizens within that society, number one. But secondly, what we do know so far is that these people, let's just say, are not of English heritage, and there does seem to be strong indication. We await those details. Who knows if the British government will ever release it? I have a feeling this is going to go in a certain direction, that these people very likely are second-generation immigrants or something along those lines, which to me suggests it still is an immigration story, right? If these people are the parents of recent immigrants, and as a result of the type of migration policy you've allowed, right, that's ultimately what you did bring into this country, then yeah, that is an immigration story, but we'll talk about that. And thirdly here, they are trying to claim that this is just an isolated incident. To which I say, I know that's not true. I'm an American. I do not follow the day-to-day news of the UK. Big, broad themes, not day-to-day. I see this every single week in my American headlines. So you British people watching this video can attest to it's probably much more common even than I'm aware of. So how is it exactly as an isolated incident, Keir Starmer? But of course, he's saying I'm deeply troubled by this. Oh, really? Are you now? Yeah, is that why you're going to do something about it? No, right? According to the British government, guys. So protesting against immigration makes you a terrorist. They're going to investigate that as terrorism. But these 2 guys who stab anywhere between 9 to 11 people on a train, don't know exactly the count, that's not terrorism. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with. So we'll tell you about this. And again, the shocking cover-up, if you're thinking the images right now, America, of Irina Zarutska, yes, I find this to be very similar because you may remember back then, the Charlotte mayor refused to release the security camera footage that they had for like basically an entire month. It leaked, and then people found out what actually happened. If you remember, the Charlotte mayor just tried to say that the suspect there, DeCarlos Brown Jr., was having a mental health episode, and basically we should have more empathy for people with mental health. And then you saw what actually happened, and you were like, what the? Like, you were shocked, right? Same situation here going on, although in fairness, it does not appear that en masse British citizens are exactly believing the blatant cover-up and nonsense right now coming from their government. So we'll bring you this story here today, and obviously, prayers up for everyone involved. I mean, it's just failed society. And I'm really not trying to single out the United Kingdom with this, because as you can tell, again, like the entire West seems to be dealing with this problem time and time again. It seems obvious that the liberals, the leftists, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, and in some countries they have different names, but ultimately we know what we're talking about here, have created, immigration or not, by the way, because if they want us, oh, the far right is wrong about this. No, actually, the conservatives, not the far right. We're the most normal people ever. Okay, we're not the extremists. Let me put it that way. You guys are the extremists for saying this is fine. But nonetheless, right, have basically created all of these societal conditions conducive to a low trust society. In other words, you got to constantly be watching your back because things are really bad, but they still police, right? They still enforce law like we're living in a high trust society. Oh, you know, everything should be fine. No, your citizens are getting stabbed every freaking week. But anyways, we'll tell you about it, guys. Do us a favor, though, if you enjoy our coverage, make sure you subscribe to the channel, okay? You know, we constantly, obviously, dealing with news stories like this, have to handle suppression and all that, so I would greatly appreciate it. But with that said, so here is the initial reporting out of Breitbart. 2 people have been arrested following a mass stabbing on a London-bound train, which left several people hospitalized on Saturday evening. Now, you heard some of the details that I already reported, but I do want to kind of bring you the story from an eyewitness themselves, because again, can't really trust the British government to do anything. So here's what someone who was on the train is saying about it.
Then heard them say, they've got a knife, I've been stabbed. And then when looking up, so they were making their way through the carriage to get away from the incident, from the suspect. They were extremely bloodied. That person ended up, when we pulled in, they were basically on the floor. We couldn't progress further down the train away from the suspect because that person ended up collapsing on the floor. We were ushered out of the station from the platform, and there was multiple people that had been stabbed that was making their way down, but the suspect had also come off the train as well. So while we were being told to come out of the station, the suspect was obviously running rampant as well, and I don't know reason, no one knows the reason why. The people that did witness it have actually gone off to the HQ. The statements have been taken. And
okay, you're getting the picture already, but serious question. Why doesn't every metro train and subway and all that stuff in every Western country, right? America, Canada, UK, EU, Australia, everywhere. Why don't they have a police officer on every single train? You might sit there and say, oh, that's too expensive. We can't afford that. Interesting proposition. Yet the government manages to afford all of our governments. Okay, again, this is a collective issue. I'm not trying to dunk on them because we are kind of dealing with a shared fight here, as you can tell. That's why I've been rooting for these people to take back their country as much as I am, people in America. They managed to afford millions of asylum seekers coming into the country. How do they afford that? No, seriously, I'm not trying to be facetious. How do they afford to give out government benefits to millions of migrants? How can you afford foreign aid to whatever freaking country out there, right? How can you afford USAID or the Canadian Anti-Hate Network or whatever British people's version of that is? I'm sure you have your own NGO industrial complex. How can you afford Keir Starmer to implement a digital ID and all this crap, and you charge your citizens twice the tax rate in America, but you can't afford to keep them safe on the train? Pardon my language, but that's no, obviously they have the money if they had to put it out there, right? But they don't want to do it. Why? I mean, don't get me wrong. Okay, first of all, right? If you simply did not allow your society to come like this, then sure, you could argue, well, you don't need to put a police officer on every train because things are relatively safe, right? It's high trust. But you've already crossed that bridge, and now you refuse to protect people. Okay, you understand? So I'm just saying, just something to consider, right? Again, before you come to me and say they can't afford that, then how can they afford to take care of all these migrants? That doesn't add up to me. Does it add up to you? No.
they are now going to the police station to give further statements. The armed police were pointed to the suspect. As we come off the train, I asked what that suspect looked like. They said it's a black male in all black, so a black hoodie. And then at the back of the station, walking calmly, as the police were coming through, like armed police, I said, I think that's the guy. And as essentially as they got closer to him, they started shouting like, get down, get down. He then was waving a knife, quite a large knife. And then they detained him. I think it was a taser that got him down in the end. But I only saw one person at that point. I did not see anyone get stabbed, but there was a lot of people being moved away from being treated for injuries and coming away with the trolleys. I'd say probably maybe 12 people in total. Initially, it looked like there was only about 4, maybe 6 that had been stabbed. But maybe when we was coming up the train, I think they doubled back and just attacked anyone that they could. I don't know if it was staff or passengers.
Yeah, so brutal, horrific, and absolutely the fault of the leadership and I guess cultural progress, quote unquote, whatever they want to call it, of Western societies. You know, they say, oh, nothing to see here, as people are literally bleeding out. Okay, and it's not an isolated incident, Keir Starmer. Okay, or Charlotte Mayor, or any of you freaking people. You're all the same. That they sit here and tell you that everything is fine. But anyways, okay. So here's what we know thus far about the identity of these migrants, because again, they're not really saying much, but update as of 11:30, I believe this is Cambridge time or whatever, British Transport Police Superintendent John Lovelace said in a statement on Sunday morning that there is currently, quote, nothing to suggest that the mass stabbing was a terror incident. Well, again, what do you think it was? Okay. And it's like, okay, mental health episode, quote unquote, whatever that's supposed to mean. Two of them were stabbing people? Really? Well, he said that the 2 suspects are a 32-year-old black British national of African descent and a 35-year-old Caribbean heritage British national. Both were born in Britain, Lovelace said. Now, what the leftists, right, the Labours, the Greens are trying to say about all of this is that, well, clearly, then there's no immigration component to this, right? They're saying, oh, well, they were British born. That means they were not migrants, and it's not terror related, which we'll come back to that in a second. But again, this is what I say about it, okay? We'll find out these, if we ever do find out these details. And we don't know at the moment. But if these people are at the very least second generation immigrants, again, I say, then that definitely has something to do with immigration. Why? It's the same thing that we talked about last week when it comes to SNAP and food stamps that are received by illegal aliens and even in a lot of cases, actually, refugees, asylum seekers, legal immigrants, quote unquote, in America. For those of you British people, they're basically like food benefits that go to poor people, okay? Because the Democrats try to say that, oh, well, the actual number of non-citizens and illegals who receive this stuff is very low, therefore they're not getting it. But I pointed out, no, that's not true. Because while not a lot of them get it, what is happening in mass is that they're getting it through their kids who are citizens or their spouses who are citizens, right? And so ultimately, and if they're the head of the household especially, which is how we measure that statistic, then that still means you're importing a bunch of dependents in this argument, at least on SNAP, right? So they come over here, your immigration system chose to bring them here. They are not able to sustain themselves. They're relying on government benefits. They're a tax negative on the nation. Then they have a bunch of children who, legally speaking, yes, are citizens. But again, the person you chose to bring over here cannot provide for themselves. So then the government has to pay for their children. And you mean to tell me that's not an immigration story? Of course it's an immigration story, right? Because who's raising the citizen children? The immigrant. So again, if it is true, if these are at least second generation, maybe you can even make an argument for third. I'd say fine. If these people have been in the UK for like 100, 150 years, then okay, maybe it's not really having to do with immigration, although it's still a crime story, okay? It's still a cultural issue, but still. Then obviously, this is still a story about immigration, right? Second generation immigrants are not that far removed from the first generation. The first generation raises them. And so yes, if you chose to bring in people who are going to raise kids like that, then it is also true to say if you had not had an immigration policy, then this would have never happened. We'll find that out if they ever tell us. But, you know, that's on one hand. Secondly, of course, they're saying this is not terror related, but yet it's being investigated as a terror incident. But they're also saying vehemently it's not a terrorism, but then it doesn't even make any sense. But that said, okay, take a listen here to the official announcement from the local police in terms of what they're willing to share with us about the entire situation.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Superintendent John Lovelace, and I'm here to provide you with an update on the incident at Huntington Station that took place here last night. It's a shocking incident, and first and foremost, my thoughts are with the family and friends of those who've been affected and those who are injured. At approximately 7:42 p.m. yesterday evening, there were calls to the police service in relation to multiple stabbings which took place on board a train service that departed Doncaster at 6:25 p.m. and was en route to London King's Cross Station. Officers immediately attended Huntington Station alongside paramedics, where armed police officers from Cambridgeshire Police boarded the train and arrested 2 people.
Oh, so finally you showed up with armed police, huh? Because a lot of them in London don't even carry guns, which is so smart, right? Again, 100 years ago in a high-trust society, yeah, maybe they didn't think it was necessary. You got to get with the times because you've created such a disaster for yourself, right? People ask, for instance, it's very interesting, right? Sometimes like these smug British or European leftists will say, why are the police in America so militarized? Do you get it now? Right? Please tell me, do you get it now? All right. Of course, right. They also, again, I think this sentiment's starting to change, but all the stuff about, school shootings, I can't believe all these Americans own guns and all that stuff. I ask on that question too. Either do you get it now, or are you going to admit like, okay, the safety problem and the crime problem and the violence problem, it doesn't really make a difference whether it's with guns or with knives. Okay. Just saying.
Within 8 minutes of the 999 call being made, 2 men were brought into police custody, where they remain this morning. I can tell you that these are the first male, a 32-year-old male, a black British national, and a 35-year-old man, a British national of Caribbean descent. They were both arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
That's the only suspicion you have, yeah, attempted murder, okay. So let's listen if they tell us anything more about these suspects. Again, they've been in custody for like over 24 hours now, so are they going to tell us anything? Let's find out.
Both were born in the United Kingdom. As stated, they remain this morning in separate police stations for questioning. 10 people were taken to hospital by ambulance, and another person self-presented later that evening.
Okay.
While 9 were initially believed to have life-threatening injuries, following assessment and treatment, 4, thankful to say, have been discharged. However, 2 patients remain in a life-threatening condition. British Transport Police declared a major incident yesterday, and counter-terrorism policing were initially supporting our investigation. However, at this stage, there is nothing to suggest that this is a terrorist incident. This is a British Transport Police investigation, and we continue to work to establish at pace the full circumstances and the motivations that have led to this incident.
Okay, so did you hear what they just said? By the way, this is being reported widely in the news, for instance. It's not a terrorism attack, because they already said that. Okay, but it's also being investigated by the counterterrorism unit, so maybe we should wait to find that out. Although, I don't trust the British authorities, to be honest, okay? You British people watching the video, I'll ask you, do you trust the British authorities? Because it seems to me that they have a pretty coordinated effort to cover all of this up. And again, whether this has anything to do with migration or not, it doesn't change the fact that society has become extremely freaking dangerous across the West, and the government basically stands there and acts like it's not a serious problem. You don't believe me? Take a listen here to UK Defense Secretary John Healey talking about this mass stabbing, saying, and I quote, "This is an isolated incident." Oh, really? Is it isolated? Don't think so.
Emerging pictures and accounts from those on the train suggests this was truly horrifying.
What will this mean for the public who are waking up, thinking about going on trains and public transport? What message do you have to them?
Well, the initial assessment is that this was an isolated incident, so there's no reason for the public not to go about their business, to continue.
Yeah, everything is fine here. It's an isolated incident. You can go about your business. Is it really, though? I think we know the obvious answer to that. Because, again, I'm American. I've actually never even been to the UK. And even though I hear about this every single week. So by my estimation of how numbers work, it probably happens every single day. But something in that ballpark, right? As a matter of fact, it was just right before Halloween, October 28th, that the London Metropolitan Police were responding to this quote-unquote incident themselves. As you can see, I'm aware of footage circulating online that relates to yesterday's incident in Uxbridge. I would urge people to stop circulating this on social media. We keep on seeing this, right? And given the social media laws, I don't know, maybe they'll arrest people for actually sharing the video. Who knows? But what do they not want people to see on social media? Well, in order to avoid speculation and further misinformation, we can confirm this suspect lived in a private residential address. Oh, but what actually happened here? I don't know. Our priority is securing justice for the man who sadly died and the others who were injured in this incident. Sharing this footage could impede future court proceedings and cause further distress to those impacted by the events as well as their loved ones. So that's the same garbage that the Charlotte mayor tried to say after Irina Zarutska. But again, it's not that we take glee in like sharing those videos, or I'm not sharing it, but people take glee in that. It's rather this very shocking nature of what's happening. And then, right, why don't they want you to share it? Because that way clowns like this right here, right, Mr. John Healy, can go out and say, go about your business. Everything is okay. It's not okay, okay? And if you're guessing what this is in reference to, well, you can see the community note right here from the BBC. Wayne Broadhurst, British man, age 49, was killed at the scene along with a 45-year-old man and a third 14-year-old victim. Okay, so basically 2 guys and a child were stabbed by a 22-year-old, oh, wait a minute, Afghan national who is in custody. But trust me, there's no connection between the migrant crisis and crime. Of course there is. Of course there is. That's why even if this incident itself, right, the mass stabbing attack on the train, has nothing to do with migration, if they claim that's true, again, I still have my reservations about that. They won't even tell us the names of these people, by the way. This is the crisis that the British government doesn't want people to talk about. Or no, now do you see why they don't want people sharing the video? Let me ask you, if the roles were reversed, right? Let's say this was a quote-unquote hate crime of white people attacking an Afghan migrant. Do you think they'd have this kind of statement? Oh, please stop sharing it. Please stop talking about it. No, of course not. It'd be wall-to-wall across not just British, but probably world news. Yeah, here we are, where it's just another day in London. Oh, British citizens, British people, English people, just getting brutally attacked by people that the British government has knowingly allowed to come to the country and then just run free around the streets, right? Of course, here's the response from the Prime Minister, saying that the appalling incident on a train near Huntington is deeply concerning. Oh, really? Is that so, Keir Starmer? It's deeply concerning. So, I was about to say that the UK is a failed state and society's falling apart. And I would argue they're basically on the brink of some type of cataclysmic event, because what you might call democracy is completely failing, considering the so-called democratically elected government does not reflect what the people are clearly asking for in mass. But I heard Keir Starmer say that he was deeply concerned. So then that convinced me everything is okay. Are we sure this even happened, guys? Oh, he said it was deeply concerning. Oh, sure, everything's fine. Ridiculous. That seriously. But he goes on to say that my thoughts are with all those affected. My thanks go to the emergency services for their response. Anyone in the area should follow the advice of the police. Again, that's all he had to say. Pretty telling. Now, that said, many British citizens out there are sharing the fact that they don't trust the government at all. And clearly this is a crisis that is not inevitable. Okay, it's not even a random freak accident. It's actually the result of what leadership has done. So take a listen to what British people are saying about this.
I'm absolutely disgusted at the violence that took place last night on the train coming into London, where 10 people were stabbed by 2 marauding men. I've woken up to watch the news this morning on the BBC, where the police and the government are saying that they have no evidence of terrorism at this point, and they're making a great song and dance about how these are 2 British nationals. The effort here seems to be political, to get people to stop worrying about it, that this is normal. But it's not normal. Things like this didn't used to happen, and we need to have a profound conversation about why our culture has shifted in this way, about why our people are being exposed to such mindless savagery, and what we can do to defend them. I think it is also completely impossible for the police to say that they don't know it's terrorism at this point, to the point where we should not think about that, because they don't know the motive. They don't know why the men did this. All we know is that it was a premeditated attack, where they brought knives, got on the train, waited for it to leave, and then began stabbing people when they couldn't escape. That, to me, fits the bill of what you would do if you wanted to cause terror in the hearts of the people present and all around the country, and it certainly worked. So, even if we don't know the exact ideology or motivations at this time, it was effectively an act of terror in my book, and I do not think the police should be shying away from that. I think that the government should be looking at what we can do to improve things, rather than just telling people to keep a stiff upper lip and carry on. We shouldn't have to live like this.
No, you shouldn't. And we shouldn't. And nobody who purports to be a member of the civilized world should, but of course, here we are, right? That's absolutely correct. For the government to sit here after not just, it's like, it would be one thing if it's just the only thing that ever happened, but it's just repeat cases of the same thing and saying, oh, everything's fine, go about your business. In a relatively small country, especially compared to ours, so keep that in mind too. When you talk about per capita, right? You hear a news headline, it's something that is affecting like a far smaller group of people overall than say America, where it's like, okay, someone gets stabbed in New York, but I live in Washington. That's very far away from the problems I'm dealing with. Obviously not, right? It's just utterly insane. Now, I want to close this video by playing something we actually did when we were talking about like the South African crisis and how perhaps the Trump administration should consider asylum status for actual asylum seekers here, which would be the people fleeing this violence. We're not here to have that conversation today, but I do want to just show you a very telling clip, even before this happened, that sums up, yes, how the British citizenry is feeling about this. And again, the failure of so-called democracy here, because clearly that's not anything resembling what's actually happening.
Oh, I live in the borough right next to Hillingdon.
Yep.
And I moved into my house in 2019. My local shop, there's been 3 stabbings, 1 murder since then.
Wow.
My friend was murdered last year up on the high street. Girl I know was murdered in Southall Park. The government are failing us. I'm so scared for my children. I have a 22-year-old son, and I'm begging him to move out of the country.
Oh my goodness, I feel for you.
What are these politicians doing to us? They're putting our children in so much danger. They're putting everyone in danger, and they're not doing nothing to help us.
And that's the thing a lot of us feel. That, you know, how many is too many?
They're pushing us to do something that we don't want to do. We are peaceful people. British people never against their government.
Yeah.
They're going to push us to it because they're not listening to us. Our friends, our family are dying. I had a cousin murdered 20 years ago who was stabbed to death, and nothing's changed, Julia.
I'm so sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, and of course that's how people feel. But of course, how does the British government respond? They probably label this woman a terrorist, if we're going to be completely honest, right? They're like, you made social media posts talking about how scared you are of your life because you genuinely have reason to be, because like you live in a place where you know multiple people being stabbed. It's not some faraway freaking issue. You're the terrorist. How dare you? You're racist. You're actually racist. Okay. This is betrayal of the highest order by a so-called democratic government, okay? I don't know what else to say about that. You know, to be elected off of a premise. And by the way, to sit here, all of these globalists and leftists around the world, okay, in all of our respective countries, and say, we're the side of democracy, and that quote-unquote far right who doesn't want to live in a society where they have to fear for their lives of getting stabbed every day, to sit here and ignore the pleas of literally mothers, children, everyone crying and begging for the government that allegedly is democratic. And by the way, even if it's not, okay, people pay taxes to, all right? To sit there and basically sacrifice the lives of their own people to a crisis that is entirely voluntary, right? It didn't even have to happen. You could have just like said no. I don't know what else to call that besides outright evil, okay? And it's like, I might even argue that's worse than authoritarian governments who kill people. Because at least the authoritarian ones are honest about it, and it's like, okay, listen, there's rules, and if you disobey, if you question us, then that's what's going to happen. Here you have quote-unquote democratic governments who not only cause pain and death upon their own citizens, but then lie about it. They won't even be honest about what's happening. I mean, are we sure that's actually better than, than it happening in the back instead of in the front? Just saying, right? But, anyways, guys, there you have it. Just utterly appalling. I feel for the people there. I feel for the people here. Again, this story sounds familiar because it's happening everywhere. And you have democratic governments that not only pretend it's not happening, they actually say we're the extremists for not wanting it to happen. We're the crazy ones. Don't ever let... I started a thing recently where I identify as a political moderate. And some people might say, you're pretty hard conservative. No, actually, I'm just normal. I mean that sincerely. I'm literally the normal one. We are all the normal ones, okay? The people who say that everything's perfectly fine after your citizens get stabbed like every freaking week, okay, those people are the insane ones. Those are the extremists, okay? Don't ever let them tell you. I don't care if they come from the center-left party, the Labour, whatever, even the Tories. No, they are the extremists. You are normal, okay? But anyways, all right, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.